Well, my major goal in speaking to you this afternoon is to get you to run for office. It's a very powerful way of making a change in the system, of running for, of getting good ideas out into discussion. I have been active in the Green Party since 1996. In that time, I've worked on over 30 Green Party campaigns. I have been a candidate 3 times. And I think that until you have been an independent candidate, and that includes running in a third party or even being an insurgent in the Democratic or Republican parties, until you have done that, you don't really understand how our government works, how our electoral system works. And you may think that you live in a democracy, because we're always told that we do live in a democracy. But when you understand the electoral system, you begin to realize that there are a lot of limitations on the way that our rights are structured. And what regulationism that was talked about earlier is alive and well in the election law context. So what I'm going to talk about today is, right now, the election law and how it operates and the limitations that we face in New York. Under the U.S. Constitution, most aspects of elections are left for all levels of public office, running for federal office or state office or local governments. The rules that govern that are left in large part to the state government. And the state law controls who has the right to vote, who may be a candidate, and the conduct of elections. And the right to vote is a very key right, as we all know, whether you have the right to cast a ballot. But also key to your right to vote is having candidates to vote for, having candidates on the ballot that represent your positions. Because if you don't have candidates that represent your positions on the ballot, then your rights, you're not being enfranchised by the system, because you cannot make a choice that represents your ideals. Not until the 1920, with the passage of the 19th Amendment, did the majority of residents of the United States have the right to vote. For over 200 years, a minority governed under the sanction of the Constitution. You need to understand that suffrage, which is the right to vote, the suffragettes were fighting for the right to vote, does not ensure popular government. It does not necessarily give the voters effective control over officials or make the elected officials have any real responsibility to the majority. That depends on various things like term limits. It was mentioned that Michigan has initiative and referendum that actually allow the voters to initiate laws. We don't have those rights in New York. So not having initiative and referendum rights is a significant limitation on our rights as voters. Generally, there's no federal right to vote. No right to vote was provided in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. The Constitution leaves the determination of who can vote to state law. Now, there have been subsequent amendments which have put in various requirements, but those do not require that everyone can vote. And if we go through, the different groups who've been empowered to vote, it still doesn't include everyone in our country. It doesn't include non-citizens. It doesn't include people under the age of 18. It doesn't include felons. So there are a large number of people who still cannot vote today. When it started out, in many early state constitutions, limited the right to vote to males, and most of them imposed property qualifications or tax-paying qualifications. One thing also to understand is the changes that have been made to broaden the right to vote have required great expenditure of energy because our Constitution is very difficult to amend. The Dred Scott decision in 1857 held that persons of African descent are not citizens. Not only could they not vote, they couldn't even bring lawsuits. That was overturned by the 14th and 15th Amendments, the Civil War, the 14th and 15th Amendments. But subsequent Supreme Court cases held that even those amendments did not give women the right to vote. Women are citizens, but being a citizen did not give women a right to vote. And it wasn't until 1920, with the 19th Amendment, that women were given the right to vote. And in 1965, Congress passed the Federal Voting Rights Act, which removed many of the barriers that were still in place, denying voters, denying blacks the right to vote. So these are just some changes showing, the yellow bars show the states with property requirements, the green bars show the states with tax-paying requirements, and the blue bars show the number of states in the Union. So you can see that the tax-paying requirements actually increased in the early years of the country as the property requirements came down. But it's interesting to see in this one, the yellow bars are racial exclusions, that while the property and tax-paying bars were coming down, the numbers that the racial barriers were going up. And one thing, while there were property requirements to vote, there were even much higher property requirements to be a candidate in the early state laws. So only the very wealthiest people were entitled to be candidates. There's a lot to be learned from the history of New York election law. So most of this information here is from a very good history of election law that was in the Gotham Gazette from New York City in 2003. But I just want to go through some of the times here. It was in the 1820s that the New York legislature extended the right to vote to all white males. It wasn't until 1834 that an amendment to the state constitution allowed for the direct popular election of the mayor of New York City. In 1846, New York voters rejected amendment to guarantee free blacks the same voting rights as whites. 1857, Dred Scott. 1870, the 15th Amendment gave blacks throughout the United States the same voting rights as whites. 1875, the 14th Amendment does not give women the right to vote. And in 1880, New York begins to require the so-called Australian ballot, a uniform ballot listing all candidates. Now, this is a very significant step in the regulation of elections by the state, because before this time, every party produced their own ballots. And you took a ballot and you dropped it in the ballot box. Now the state is getting involved and deciding. They're having a uniform ballot, but this also means that they are going to control who can be the candidates on that ballot. And so we have to have rules then for being a candidate. And in 1890, we started having the government manage and pay for elections to select the party officials for who would run the parties that choose the candidates. Voting machines in 1892. In 1894, the state establishes a system, and this is actually an amendment to the New York Constitution, that says all election positions are to be divided between the two major parties. So third-party registrants have no opportunity to participate in any of the election positions in the state. 1913 was the first time the 17th Amendment was added to the Constitution, and this is the first time that senators, U.S. senators, could be elected by popular vote. 1917, New York gives women the right to vote. 1920, the 19th Amendment gives women throughout the United States the right to vote. 1965, the Federal Voting Rights Act. 1967, the Supreme Court held that voting districts had to be established so as to ensure minority representation. In 1969, non-citizens who have children in public schools were given the right to vote by the New York City Council in school board elections. In 1970, a federal court determined that the federal government has to supervise all election processes, voting practices in New York City, including redistricting. In 1971, the 26th Amendment lowers the minimum voting age to no more than 18. So the Constitution does allow a lower minimum voting age, but it can't be higher than 18. New York was 21, so this lowered the New York voting age to 18. 1975, election information was required to be provided in New York City in Spanish. So we've made great strides in our country in enfranchising various classes of people, but there's still significant barriers in exercising our right to vote. First, we face impediments to actually voting through voter ID requirements, not allowing same-day voter registration, having election day be on a work day, citizenship requirements, and prohibitions on felons voting. We also face techniques and devices which are used to keep our votes from being counted after they've been cast. Hand-counted paper ballots are a very good way of counting ballots. We have restrictive ballot access laws that reduce the number of candidates who are allowed on the ballot. Voters have fewer candidates to choose from for almost all public offices today than voters did 100 years ago. This was a survey that was done by Ballot Access News, which is an excellent publication if you're interested in third-party legal issues. Fourth, money is allowed to dominate the forums of debate, so most of the voices that people hear speaking on issues are the voices of money. And we don't have free and fair elections if voters don't get to hear the voices of candidates who don't have money. We need public forums where all candidates have an opportunity to speak. Fifth, we have the gerrymandering of election districts to favor candidates of the two major parties. The major parties create the election districts, and because we have winner-take-all seats, single-member election districts, this this permits the gerrymandering. Studies show that if you have multi-member districts of at least 5 people, it's virtually impossible to gerrymander. So proportional voting, multi-member districts are a way to avoid gerrymandering. The winner-take-all voting system does not allow each person's vote to be counted. In order to represent everyone, we need to switch to methods of voting that allow each vote to count, such as proportional voting. So what does it mean when some people can't vote and when all these restrictions are in place? It means that many important issues are never debated, that crucial decisions are made without input from and contrary to the interests of the majority of the people. I want to just quickly review New York state election law and the ballot access rules that currently apply in our state. These 2 pages here are just the index to the New York election law, showing you the broad general categories that are regulated in the state: party organization, the registration and enrollment of voters, the election ballot. Article 6 is the designation and nomination of candidates, how you get to be a candidate on the ballot. The conduct of elections, the canvass of results, special rules for presidential voters and special ballots. And of course, we still don't have the right to vote for president. The president is still elected by the Electoral College. I'm going to just review the provisions which are shown in the 2011 political calendar. This is something the Board of Elections produces every year, and I think the most crucial election laws that relate to running for office and voting are on this handout. It's a 2-page legal-size document. I recommend downloading it from the election website. And it has various requirements. The 2 main categories of candidates are candidates from ballot access parties, and these are parties under New York election law whose candidate for governor has obtained more than 50,000 votes. So that in New York, every 4 years, parties have an opportunity to get ballot status. This makes New York, because it only happens once every 4 years in New York for one race, this means that New York is one of the 2 most restrictive states in the country for getting ballot status. And Howie Hawkins was the Green Party's candidate for governor last year. We're very grateful to Howie for getting more than 50,000 votes. We now have ballot status, which means that it's much, much easier, for the reasons I'll describe, for the Green Party to run candidates in every election for the next 4 years. So, and then if you don't have ballot status, you go through a process, an independent nominating commission, nominating petition process, and the requirements for getting the number of signatures that are required are much more onerous than they are if you are a ballot status party. Also, the time frame when you can collect signatures is after the ballot status parties have already collected. People cannot sign more than 1 petition, so the ballot status parties have access to voters first. Those are some of the major impediments to running as an independent candidate. So the dates here for the designating petitions this year, June 7th is the first day for signing designating petitions. New York, we have alternate years, local offices and state and federal offices. This year, 2011, the odd years are the years for local offices, our town and county seats. My county, Steuben County Board of Elections, produces a very helpful list of all the offices and all the seats that are up for election. I encourage you to get copies of similar lists from your counties to encourage people to run. It really does make a difference to have more candidates on the ballot. The signature requirements for designating an opportunity to ballot petitions are shown here. And I'll just pick out one example here. If you're running for state assembly, which is something I did in 2004, you need 500 signatures if you're running in a ballot status party. Now, the next page of this handout shows the requirements for independent nominating petitions. And if we look at the signature requirements to run for the state assembly as an independent candidate, it's 1,500 signatures. Now, that's actually the maximum number of signatures for a designating petition, because for a designating petition, there's an alternative amount, which is 5% of the enrolled voters of the political party in the political unit. So the Green Party, for example, our enrollment is not particularly high, so 5% of the registered Greens in the district is not usually a particularly large number. And other information that's on the 2011 political calendar has to do with the times for voter registration when there's opportunity to register others to vote, the mail-in registration, voting by absentee ballots, the campaign finance, filing requirements. So a lot of important information for people running for office. And I will stop there.